At the venue, for some reason, my husband, Eric, and my in-laws are ignoring me. The other relatives are reacting the same way. Suspicious. I pretend to go to the bathroom and secretly observe them from the shadows. That's when terrifying words reach my ears.
A wife who can't have children is bad luck.
Yeah, talking to someone unlucky like her will curse us too. It's bad if we don't deal with her.
Hearing their words, I tremble with rage. I won't forgive them, blaming me for infertility and then ignoring my very existence. I have to put my plan into action immediately. After disappearing from the venue, my phone vibrates. When I answer, it's Eric, as I expected.
You. What have you done?
Eric cries out painfully as soon as I pick up. I chuckle softly. What are you so panicked about? It's the truth, isn't it? Eric seems half crazed because of the photos I displayed on the screen. But this is just the start of my revenge. From now on, I'll show them hell. My name is Megan Morris, and I'm 35 years old. I married my husband, Derek, 9 years ago when I was 26. At the singles party, Eric, 2 years older than me, was incredibly kind, and we got along well. When we started dating and thinking about marriage, Eric told me he planned to return to his rural hometown and work in agriculture. His village, close to becoming a ghost town, had a declining population and was on the brink of becoming deserted. Despite my surprise, I eventually followed Eric's passionate plea to come with me, though not from Eric's hometown. I also came from the countryside. I'd grown tired of living in the unfamiliar city. Luckily, my brother and his wife live at my parents' house. The fact that I wouldn't need to take care of my parents later on also encouraged me. After that, everything fell into place and we married. I quit my job and moved to this small village, Eric's hometown. But even though it's a village, most of the people there are Eric's relatives. We live in a spacious house that Eric's parents originally lived in. While they moved into a smaller guest house next door, they're cheerful and caring and always look out for us. Farming is tough, but living surrounded by nature isn't so bad. Most importantly, the people in this village are all good. When I said this, Eric replied happily.
It's thanks to the guardian.
The guardian is a stone statue resembling a small Buddha found in the village square. It's not only in the square, but scattered all over the village. Some houses even have stuffed dolls modeled after the guardian. This village has a unique tradition. All the villagers revere the guardian as a god. According to Eric, the guardian never overlooks evil or forgives wrongdoers. That's why, he says, all the villagers are good people. I figured that old villages like this have such legends everywhere, so I didn't think too much about it. Life remained peaceful, and I soon forgot about it entirely. However, a nightmare was steadily approaching me. It happened a few years after I moved here. I had completely gotten used to farm work. I woke up early in the morning and spent my days harvesting vegetables quickly. It was an unchanging routine, but there was one thing that worried me. Eric and I still hadn't had children. I was nearly 30. I used to think it would just happen naturally, but lately I'd started to feel some anxiety. That's because as a few years went by, more people began asking, "No kids yet? It's up to fate." I'd answer cheerfully each time. Still, it's typical of an old farming village to bluntly ask such sensitive questions. Everyone asks the same thing. Eric's parents and even older passersby would openly inquire, "Why can't you have any?" I kept giving vague answers each time, but it was starting to make me increasingly uncomfortable. It was one day like that. I was sipping tea on the porch after a long morning of harvesting. My mother-in-law Linda called out to me,
Hey, Megan, how are things going with your bedroom life?
"What?" I almost spit out my tea at the sudden, incomprehensible question.
It's strange that you haven't had kids in years. Are you not satisfying Eric?
I was dumbfounded as these unbelievable words came from Linda's mouth. "What are you talking about? Stop it. You don't talk about these things." I said this hurriedly to cut off the conversation.
It's an important topic.
Linda insisted on me, but I ignored her and stormed out of the room. This village has its fair share of old-fashioned thinking, but this was just too much. Asking about marital life so boldly was disturbing. Having left the house, I decided to kill some time by walking along the road to the park. Soon, I noticed a figure in the distance, maybe someone from the neighborhood. I tensed up momentarily. I thought they might bring up kids again, but when I recognized her face, I felt relieved. It was Sally Nelson, who lives nearby. Sally gave me a hesitant smile. I smiled back at her. Sally is the only one in this village who hasn't been intrusive with me. She's 10 years younger than I am, so she's about 20 now. She isn't originally from this village. After her parents died in an accident, she was taken in by her grandmother here. That was a little before I came as a bride. She graduated from a nearby high school and now helps with her grandmother's orchard. We'd sometimes cross paths like this, but she was quiet and reserved, so we didn't talk much. She also didn't hang out with others, so people in the village think she's a bit odd. I used to find Sally's lack of engagement somewhat uninteresting, but now I'm grateful for her discretion. But now I truly appreciated Sally's presence because she didn't ask intrusive questions. I felt uncomfortable about Linda's situation, but thanks to Sally, I feel like my heart has been cleansed a bit. However, this didn't mean the problem was solved. My mother-in-law Linda, father-in-law Mark, and even the distant relatives living nearby keep saying similar things.
You need to put in more effort to seduce your husband.
You should take the lead with him.
They speak their minds without restraint. Linda went even further, suggesting something that made me shiver.
Last night's dinner was mostly veggies. You should add more meat and try some garlic. It might boost Eric's virility.
How did she even know what we had for dinner yesterday? She's way too nosy. Unable to take it anymore, I decided to talk to Eric about everything that had happened so far. I can't handle this anymore. Everyone asks me, do you have kids yet? Linda asks about our nightlife. Honestly, it's painful. Without looking away from the TV, Eric gave me a half-hearted response.
What are you talking about? My mom and everyone else are just worried about you.
It's not concern, it's prying. Do they ever say anything to you?
Why would they say anything to me? Infertility is a woman's fault, right?
What? I was stunned to hear such absurd words from Eric. He couldn't really be that old-fashioned, could he? I was dumbfounded. Women aren't the only ones responsible. Sometimes it's about compatibility, and sometimes it's the man's fault.
Me? Days no way.
Eric with a puzzled expression. He seems genuinely puzzled from the bottom of his heart. While I could understand the older villagers having outdated views, I was surprised that even relatively young Eric thought this way. Anyway, I want kids too. I think we should get tested for infertility. We need to know the cause to address it. I suggested that we go to a gynecologist together. As expected, Eric grumbled and tried to come up with excuses.
Why should a guy have to go to a place like that?
He was pretty vocal about his objections, but after some convincing, I managed to secure his agreement on the condition that we go to a hospital outside the village. Afterward, we went to a hospital and had tests together. A few weeks later, we returned and were informed of the results.
The issue isn't with you, Mrs. Morris. The problem is with your husband. His body isn't producing sperm. He has azoospermia.
Upon hearing this, Eric exploded.
Really? It can't be my fault. This is ridiculous.
I was shocked to see Eric standing up and yelling. I'd never seen him like this before. The doctor, looking perplexed, showed us the paper with the test results. Eric stared at the paper, then went silent, his face twisting in anger. He must have been deeply shocked. I felt sorry for them and couldn't say anything. That night, I gently spoke to Eric. The doctor said that with a more thorough examination, they might find the cause and be able to treat it, right? It's a bit of a trek to get there, but I'll help out too. But Eric just hung his head without responding. He probably never imagined that he could be the cause of our infertility. I felt sorry for him and couldn't say anything else, leaving the room in silence. However, I quickly realized that my sympathy was a mistake. Eric's attitude started getting worse. The brutal diagnosis of azoospermia seemed to have shredded Eric's pride as a man, perhaps to reclaim his fractured self-esteem. He became unusually aggressive. His anger was mostly directed at me. Complaints about my slow farm work, the quality of my cooking. He increasingly picked fights and got angry over trivial matters. At first, I thought he just couldn't handle the test results and felt pity for him, so I kept quiet. However, as it kept happening, I started getting really annoyed. Talking back to each other increased our quarrels. Because of this, the house was always filled with a tense atmosphere. Naturally, there was no intimacy, so having a child was out of the question. He refused to go back to the hospital for treatment. To make matters worse, everyone in the village still assumed our infertility was my fault. I was the only one getting the criticism. I wanted to tell the truth to Eric's parents.
Don't tell anyone about it.
He glared at me with eyes like ice. If I tell them the truth, what will happen to me? The mere thought of what might happen if I spoke up terrified me. Besides, even if I told them, there was no guarantee they'd believe me. In any case, everyone's mindset is old-fashioned. The prevailing belief is that infertility is solely the woman's fault. That must be why Eric was so furious when he was told he could be the cause. Living like that for months, I couldn't take it anymore. I understood he was shocked, but I felt like a punching bag for his frustrations. Maybe it's better if we separate. I had started to think that way. After half a year, Eric's nasty remarks hadn't stopped. By that time, I was certain I wanted a divorce. The problem was, once again, the village's old-fashioned beliefs. There's a pervasive stigma that divorce is disgraceful. I had also heard rumors of a wife who had requested a divorce and then faced harsh verbal abuse from her husband. Considering this, I knew he wouldn't easily agree, so I decided to leave the signed divorce application and run away from this village. I knew it was a drastic measure, but I was at my breaking point. I secretly started making preparations without Eric noticing. And then, the following month, that day, Eric was supposed to leave the village to deliver crops. It was the perfect opportunity. But as I was packing my bags, the front door opened. "Why are you here?" There was Eric, who was supposed to be out. His eyes were fierce as he yelled.
Where are you going?
When I stayed silent, Eric glanced at the divorce papers on the table.
So, you were trying to divorce me. Don't mess with me. If people find out my wife left me, it'll be a disgrace. You'll make me look like a fool.
This was exactly the reaction I had expected. After a torrent of insults, he said,
If you ever think of running away again, you know what will happen.
He glared at me with sharp eyes. My plan had failed. I felt hopeless. But how had he found out? I had been so careful and discreet in my preparations. From that point on, Eric's treatment of me became even worse. He'd complain that I hadn't cleaned well enough or that just looking at my face annoyed him. If I talked back, it was a nightmare.
What a bitch to run away from her husband. The guardian sees everything. Your sins will come to light.
That became Eric's favorite phrase. I'd started to despise the guardian, which the villagers kept mentioning. I thought it was just superstition. But is that stone statue really watching me? It's hard to believe that those who try to escape this village would be punished. But somehow, my location and movements were always found out. I had become utterly terrified. Gradually, I began to feel a sense of resignation. Time passed, and I was approaching my 35th birthday. One day, Sally, who lived nearby, came to visit. "It's unusual for you to come by. What's up?" Sally and I had started chatting when we met. Unlike the gossiping villagers who always looked down on me, Sally didn't pry into my business and continued to be the only woman who treated me kindly.
Megan, there's something I really need to tell you.
Sally's unusually serious expression made me hesitant. I invited her inside and served some tea. Sally glanced around nervously. Then, without speaking, she gestured for me to come over. We went into a rarely used room that had become a storage space. What's going on? What's the matter? Not understanding why, I followed her and asked curiously, and Sally murmured with relief,
It's safe here.
Then she began to speak like a dam had burst.
I can't take it anymore. In fact, this village.
And that's when she told me the shocking truth. It was the true nature of this terrifying village. Several months later, since that day, Sally and I have seen each other secretly several times. Ever since learning about this village, we have been trying to figure out a way to escape. The truth Sally revealed was shocking. After hearing such things, I felt an even stronger urge to get out of here as soon as possible. But we needed to act carefully. This plan would be over if it got exposed. It took some time, but we finally set a date for execution. It's on Sunday this weekend. Once every few years, there's a feast in honor of the village's guardian spirit, bringing all relatives together. We couldn't miss this rare opportunity when everyone would be gathered in one place. After many discussions with Sally, we had done everything necessary. Our preparations were complete. The only thing left was to carry out the plan. The gathering would be held at night. The venue was the only restaurant in the village. Though the building was old, it had a large capacity and could accommodate most of the villagers. Like in previous years, I went there in the afternoon to help out. I greeted my in-laws, who were also present. Hello, but after barely glancing at me, they quickly disappeared somewhere else. Maybe they were busy, so I didn't worry and tried to help with the meal prep. But not just my in-laws, the other relatives ignored me too. In fact, I was outright being shunned. Did I do something wrong? Confused, I kept going until night fell. Then other relatives and villagers started to arrive. Among them was Eric, but even he was acting the same way. For some reason, he was also ignoring me. I feel like I've become a ghost or something. Not understanding why, I grew only more anxious and irritated, so I pretended to go to the bathroom and secretly listen to everyone's conversations. That's when terrifying words pierced my ears.
Megan never ended up having kids, right? At her age, it's impossible now. Well, an infertile wife is a bad omen. She's cursed by the guardian.
Linda started speaking in a bored tone, and soon after, a tipsy and flushed Eric nodded in agreement.
Yeah, that's right. If you talk to someone that unlucky, you'll end up cursed too. Everyone should just avoid her.
Of course. Last night, I made sure the villagers knew. I told them that speaking to Megan would bring down the guardian's wrath.
With those words, Mark laughed. Hearing their conversation made my body tremble with anger. I couldn't forgive them. It's not my fault that I couldn't have children. And to make matters worse, they're calling my very existence a bad omen and deliberately ignoring me. How can grown adults behave this way? No matter how you think, this village is crazy. We should carry out our plan as soon as possible. We plan to escape from this village, but that alone won't satisfy us. I needed to retaliate against them somehow. I made up my mind. Sally poked her head out of the venue a short while later. It's a perfect timing. Without exchanging a word, we nodded at each other, and then I turned off the venue lights. The sudden darkness caused people to start talking.
What happened?
Is it a power outage?
Amid the commotion, Sally tinkered with the computer in the corner of the venue. It had been set up along with a projector and a screen to showcase the guardian and the village's history. We decided to use it to our advantage. After a few moments, an image appeared on the screen.
What? What the heck is this?
Eric screamed. His parents, relatives, and the other villagers all began murmuring as they stared at the screen.
Who did this? Was it Megan? Where is she?
Eric went berserk and started causing a scene, so Sally and I decided to withdraw for now. We slipped out of the venue quietly and met up outside. Maybe about 3 minutes had passed since we slipped out. My phone began to vibrate repeatedly. It was an incessant string of calls from Eric.
Megan, what did you do?
Eric shouted in a voice full of anguish right from the start. I chuckled. What's the rush? It's just the truth, isn't it? People seem to be misinformed, so I thought I'd clarify. Displayed on the projector was a test result from an obstetrician several years ago. It was a medical certificate stating that Eric had azoospermia. The words, projected large on the screen, were enough to shock everyone in the room. Eric, now exposed for what he had tried to keep hidden, was in a state of panic. He seemed extremely disoriented, repeatedly shouting in a barely audible voice. He was so noisy that I hung up the phone quickly. The phone kept vibrating afterward, but I ignored it. Watching with concern, Sally looked at me with a worried expression.
Is everything all right?
It's going as expected, but we need to push a bit further. The wounds I've endured can't be healed so easily. Together with Sally, I went back to the venue. Peeking inside, the scene looked like a hellish nightmare.
Is this true? Were you really infertile?
Eric, no way.
Everyone was pressing Eric for answers.
This is a lie. Megan set this up.
Eric, pale and drenched in sweat, continued making excuses. The villagers believed that our lack of children was my fault as a woman, but the reality was different. I had no issues that would have caused infertility at the time of testing. It was Eric's azoospermia that prevented us from having children without being told the truth. I was blamed, I was criticized for not having children, and was shunned. The countless cruel words left me enduring many painful days. I couldn't forgive them. Amid the murmurs in the hall, Sally and I entered.
Megan, what are you doing?
Eric found me and yelled angrily.
Don't joke around. Doing this, you'll suffer the wrath of the guardian. You'll be cursed, and something terrible will happen to you.
Those words made me snap. What the guardian? It's just surveillance cameras snooping on us. It's disgusting. When I said that, silence fell over the hall. The truth being exposed made Eric, his parents, and the villagers pale. Yes, the guardian wasn't a guardian spirit at all. In fact, the guardian statues around the village contained hidden surveillance cameras. Even the plush toys modeled after the guardian that were placed in homes had cameras inside. In one of the rooms at the community center, bored old folks were monitoring outsiders' actions through these cameras. That's why my attempts to escape were fully known. It was that day that Sally taught me about this secret. It was about 10 years ago, when Sally was taken in by her grandmother in the village. Sally, who had just lost her parents, felt lonely. One day, feeling desperate for company, she secretly followed her grandmother to her job. Her grandmother went to the community center. There, her watched the villagers on the surveillance cameras while chatting with the other seniors. At that moment, Sally learned about the guardian's hidden cameras, a secret passed down through generations in the village. Though shocked, things started making more sense to Sally. She realized this was why rumors spread so quickly. It was one thing to be gossiped about through idle chatter, but to be monitored while walking down the street or even inside your own home seemed too much. She came to despise the village's obsession with invading others' privacy, so she tried to stay away from gossip and live her life quietly. But the villagers, noticing she didn't join in, criticized Sally for being different. Despite being fed up with the village, she had no family or anywhere else to go. She had to endure and live on. But one day, as she approached the age of 25, her grandmother pressured her to meet a suitable partner.
If you don't have kids soon, you'll end up infertile like Megan.
She was persistently pushed to marry an older widower living at the edge of the village. Naturally, Sally refused such absurd demands, but her grandmother began to threaten her.
You'll be cursed by the guardian.
When she felt she could no longer stand it, she thought I might be the one who could help. She proposed that we escape the village together after hearing of the miserable treatment I had endured due to the gossip. That day, Sally moved to a different room instead of talking in the living room because she noticed a plush toy of the guardian was placed there. I hadn't paid it any attention. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was just a common plush toy often seen in this village. However, that plush toy had a camera inside too. Of course, Eric must have set it up to keep tabs on my movements. No wonder my every action was exposed. From when I tried to escape to when Linda correctly guessed what I had for dinner, it all made sense now. They had been watching me through the camera. The realization made me shiver with fear. My instincts told me it was dangerous to stay in this village. I decided to go along with Sally's suggestion and realized we needed to escape from this village as soon as possible. Together, we came up with a plan, but would simply escaping be enough? I couldn't be satisfied without settling old scores for the wrongs done to me over the years. That's what I thought. First, I needed to clear my name, then I would.
Sally, did you tell them, traitor?
Sally's grandmother, who raised her, shouted harshly. Sally glared back at her.
I'm grateful you took me in when I had no family, but I can't stand living like this. I absolutely hate spying on people's lives and surviving by gossiping and whispering behind others' backs.
What nonsense.
The grandmother and the villagers began to stir in protest. To silence them, I delivered the final blow. I fiddled with the computer and projected new images onto the screen. The villagers were shocked by what they saw. Eric flirted with a young woman from the village. Linda secretly added mop water to the tea served at community meetings. Mark wrapped his arms around a married woman's shoulders and waist. Sally's grandmother stole vegetables from another villager's field. Nearly everyone present was caught in embarrassing situations, clearly shown in these photos. Everyone was stunned into silence. Eric shouted,
When did you manage to take these photos?
How had we captured these compromising images? Sally explained, It's impossible for all the villagers to be good people. Since we know where the cameras are, those who have things to hide do their dirty work in the camera's blind spots. We focused on the blind spots of the cameras, meaning the areas invisible to the guardian statue and plush toys. Then, we strategically placed our own small cameras, which we bought online, in the spots most convenient for committing evil deeds. And then out they came. Villagers' wrongdoings were filmed one after another. They carried out their petty sins in places they assumed were blind spots. Yet, they had the audacity to claim that everyone in the village was a good person. It's honestly laughable. We found and saved the crucial moments from the camera footage. Then we exposed those images to the public eye. If you get screwed, get back at it. They violated my privacy, so I was going to return the favor. Now, they should understand how low it is to gossip maliciously about others. My explanation left the villagers visibly frustrated and silent. All the villagers are good people is a complete lie. This is just a group of scumbags. They're out here doing shady stuff while having fun monitoring outsiders' actions. Enough of this nonsense. I don't want to stay a second longer in this backward village where privacy is non-existent. With that loud declaration, I pushed divorce papers in front of Eric. The sudden move left him gaping, unable to respond. His parents and the villagers were equally dumbfounded, not expecting me to fight back. They probably never expected me to strike back. Certainly, there was a time when I almost gave up. However, now that I've found an ally in Sally and have a way out, I can't just sit back and take this quietly. I looked down at them, stunned into silence. Goodbye, you pitiful people.
Goodbye.
Sally echoed, glaring at the villagers with disdain. Without a glance back, we left the venue. Outside, we grabbed our 2 suitcases hidden in the shed. They contained all the essentials for a new life. The divorce papers are already left at the house, so now all that's left is to take this and leave the village. But as we walked away, I suddenly stopped in my tracks.
What happened?
Sally asked curiously. I have to do this, I said, grabbing a farming hoe that was leaning against a nearby house. We headed to the square where I swung the hoe with all my might. A loud crash echoed as the guardian statue shattered magnificently. Of course, the surveillance camera hidden inside was also destroyed to pieces.
How bold you are, Megan.
Leaving something like that up would only bring trouble. I feel so much better. Saying that, we laughed together. Afterward, we destroyed all the small guardian statues scattered around the village. We had also thrown away the plush toys inside the house. I can't believe they thought of such a terrifying idea. This statue, called the Guardian, was originally created long ago for misbehaving kids. Teaching kids that they get scolded by the Guardian if they misbehaved seemed to have a noticeable impact. But as times changed, it shifted from teaching little kids to punishing those who didn't fit in. Mainly, it targeted outsiders like me and people like Sally who didn't try to adapt to village life. At first, people would just gather to nitpick at those who didn't align with the villagers' expectations. In the end, people are scarier than curses or superstitions. But with changing times, rumors evolved from mere chatter into surveillance cameras that could actually keep an eye on people. In this closed-off village, watching others under the guise of the fictitious superstition of the Guardian became normalized. Exposing people's privacy is troubling, but even more so is the stubborn unwillingness to break free from old-fashioned thinking. The twisted, negative energy suffusing the village seemed to have ultimately corroded the hearts of its inhabitants. I've come to believe that humans are far scarier than any curse or haunting. I have no desire to stay in a place like this any longer. Without looking back, we left that decaying, outdated village behind. Afterward, rumor had it that infighting had broken out in that village. It was probably because I exposed everyone's wrongdoings. After ugly conflicts, the villagers split apart. Their community has stopped working. This affected the farming as well. They couldn't coordinate tasks, leading to frequent mistakes. Blaming one another, they began to shift responsibility. Then the quality of the vegetables dropped, and the Agricultural Association complained. No one wanted to take the village's produce anymore. Of course, no money was coming in. As a result, nearly everyone fell into poverty, and Eric and I were finally divorced without incident. I worried that he wouldn't submit the divorce papers I had left at home, so I consulted a lawyer after leaving the village. With their help, it was confirmed that Eric had filled out and submitted the divorce papers. He agreed to the divorce so quickly because he wanted to remarry right away. The other person was a woman living on the outskirts of the village with whom he'd been having an affair, but with the food shortage affecting the whole village, his household was no exception. The woman ran off after realizing they could barely make ends meet. His parents also struggled financially, constantly fighting each day. No matter how much they're suffering, I can't muster any sympathy for them. I didn't want to have anything to do with that place again or even remember it. Afterward, we settled into a new place and are living peacefully. However, the journey here was tough. Sally has no family, and my parents' house is already crowded with my brother and his wife, so I couldn't impose on them. After leaving the village, there was no one we could rely on. That's why we secretly planned to look for jobs before leaving the village. But because of the surveillance cameras, we couldn't move around too openly. Whenever we needed to strategize, we talked in a storage shed that had no cameras and coordinated everything using the computer. Though it took a long time, we finally found jobs through repeated remote interviews. My experience in office work from my single days paid off. Even though it was a temp job, it didn't matter. We also found a place to live. It's a small apartment that doesn't require a guarantor, but no matter how cramped it is, it's still much better than the village environment. Sally only had experience in farming, so finding a job was challenging. She stayed with me while she looked. Shortly after we left the village, she found an office job. Being in her 20s worked to her advantage, and she was hired despite having no experience. Soon, my efforts were recognized, and I was promoted to a full-time position. My salary increased, allowing me to move from the tiny apartment to a more decent condo. Sally became independent as well. She decided to live in an apartment nearby. Of course, I acted as her guarantor. We've since made friends at work and in our neighborhood and are enjoying life every day. I'm really glad we left that village. At one point, I lost my husband, my home, and my job. But by being brave, I was able to start over. I'd tell my past self, never give up. It was my refusal to abandon hope that brought me to where I am today.